swag vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And today I'm very excited to have Pete M. Pete, who has been living in recovery since September 10th, 2004. Pete lives in North Carolina, just outside of Wilmington, with his wife, Christina, to whom he's been happily married for 9 years. He's the proud father of 3 adult sons and a grandfather to 2, with another grandbaby on the way. Recently retired, Pete is embracing this new season of life by spending time near the ocean, hitting the golf course, and traveling with his family. His journey is a reminder of the gifts that recovery makes possible: family, freedom, and a life filled with joy. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How you doing today, Pete?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
Man, thank you so much for being here. So what was it like growing up, Pete?
It was fun. Not really. I'm the youngest of 5 boys. I grew up with a dad who liked to drink a lot and was a little unpredictable. As the youngest of 5 boys, I've heard it said a lot over the years. People say I just didn't fit in or I didn't feel comfortable, and that certainly describes me. I was always kind of trying to find my way, and somewhere around middle school, about 7th grade, I started getting in trouble in school, looking for attention, cutting up in class, that kind of stuff. And, I got attention all right. It wasn't really, I think, what I was hoping for. But certainly, I did get that attention. And, from that point on, I just sort of, there's a fork in the road for all of us. And for whatever reason, I went down the fork I wasn't supposed to go down, and started running around with kids in the neighborhood and getting into mischief and things like that. And, really didn't know who I was. So I just kind of, adhered to whatever group I was with or whatever people I was with, and kind of did whatever they did, and was really a follower, and, just kind of led me to a lot of mischief, let's say.
Did you have any early feelings about like alcohol or drugs? And you said your dad was a drinker. Did that impact you at all?
Yeah. I thought it was very normal. But my dad, I use the word unpredictable. I mean, sometimes he'd be very loving and it was like great attention. I'd go make a drink for him, when I'm 9, 10, 11 years old, whatever the case might be. And that was like a bonding experience. But other times he would be, rageful, or, you just didn't know what you were walking into. And, things could go from that to very bad very quickly. So, but to me, I saw a lot of drinking growing up. All of my brothers, none of them are alcoholic, which I find interesting. But, it was kind of normal to me that there was drinking in the house after work. You worked, you came home, you drank. Sometimes you passed out on the couch, sometimes you yelled and screamed, and, sometimes everything was fine. So it was something I saw from him, but really not around my friends until I started getting in the neighborhood as a young high school kid, I would say. I got exposed to a few opportunities to guys, drinking on the street corner or something like that. And, again, if I was with that crowd and they're like, hey, here's a 40-ouncer, do you want to take a sip? I certainly wasn't going to embarrass myself by saying no. So, I would do that a few times, but, my drinking didn't really start to take off until I was about 15 years old. I moved to Michigan because I was a little bit of a youth that was, really struggling with getting in trouble. And there was an opportunity for me to move to Michigan with a family friend and go to high school up there. And at the time, I thought it was a great opportunity to get away and get a fresh start. And I grew up in kind of a lower class neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina. There was nothing good really going on around there. And I moved to Michigan and went to a middle class neighborhood and went to a private high school and met a lot of kids that were affluent and had access to parties every weekend and alcohol. And that's really where I got exposed to starting to drink.
Do you remember the first time you felt the effects?
Yeah, the very first time I drank, I was 15. I went over to with a couple of girls and another guy to a house that somebody was house sitting for, and we got into their liquor cabinet and started making concoctions of things. I couldn't tell you what they were, but there was some red soda involved. And I know that because, I blacked out and threw up all over a white carpet, and just made a terrible mess. And really, like I said, blacked out the first time I drank. And really that was a theme that stuck with me most of the time I drank. I just had no control whatsoever. Once I started to drink, and throughout high school, I would say, I'm going to go to this party and I'm just going to have a couple. I'm going to sit back and chill and be in the corner and whatever. But I would immediately feel the effect of alcohol. And then really from the beginning had very little control, very little.
So what, I guess, so you're in high school, and how did it escalate, Pete? How did well, one of the things, were there any consequences as well? Sure. Maybe that's 2-part questions, Pete. Sorry to throw it at you, but.
Sure, no, absolutely. So there were consequences. I can, going to parties, hanging my head out of a car at midnight, driving home, throwing up outside the window, getting pulled over by police, lots of fights and dust ups and those types of things. Fortunately, nothing that stuck, so to speak. It was mostly what you would consider minor altercations, but it escalated. I tell you, I think I got one of my first resentments that I can really remember against my parents. I went up to Michigan willingly, but, in my alcoholic mind, which I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but I construed that they abandoned me and shipped me off, and, that my parents really never cared about me. And that's something I struggled with for many, many years. And, eventually, through recovery was able to kind of address some of those issues. Cause, I really, here I feel like I'm this, young kid, just out there on my own. I was living with a guardian that was the principal of the high school. So, my trouble at school was mostly covered up. I didn't have a lot of supervision, and, the drinking, I would say, escalated to a degree of what a, 16 or 17-year-old kid can get into. And then I joined the Army at 17, and, I would say that was probably really a big catalyst of escalation of my drinking. At 18, I was stationed in Italy, which was fantastic. But the legal drinking age in Italy is you got an ID card. And so I was able to buy, both beer, wine, liquor on base. The military is certainly, at least at that time in the late 80s, was very okay with drinking and a drinking culture. And it was not focused on going to anybody and say, hey, I got a problem. So, at 18, I had gotten married. I had met a girl and found out I was getting stationed in Italy, and we had been dating for a while. And I said, I don't want a long distance relationship, so why don't we get married? And that's what we did. And so she and I went over to Italy, and I spent almost 4 years there, where my drinking really escalated because there were no checks and balances on me. As long as I was performing well, as far as the Army was concerned, a lot of misfortunes and, shenanigans were swept under the rug. But towards the end of my time there, I started a trend of starting to have my troubles mount. And one of the good things about the Army is every, 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to get transferred to a new duty station. And I use that to my advantage. I would really escalate towards the end of my time somewhere. And then as I was going to be transferred to the next place, I would say it's going to be different. I'm going to slow down. This is not good for me. I'm, 21, 22, I'm coming back from Italy, already starting to say, I really need to kind of, chill out a little bit. I need to drink more responsibly. The thought never crossed my mind of stopping drinking. That was out of the question. But, and I also had to keep up this charade with my wife at the time of, I know what I'm doing. I have it in control, but she would say things like, well, what happened last night? And I wouldn't know. And so I'd be trying to piece it together, but I'm trying to convince her that I'm not out of control, even though I was starting to get that way. So that was definitely an escalation.
Well, don't we call that the illusion of control? Is that
exactly?
Exactly. So, what? I guess when did anyone notice that your drinking was escalating? Was there a time when you realized I want to stop but can't?
So for sure, my immediate family knew about my drinking. My wife. We eventually had 3 children along the way. I transferred to Texas for a year. Again, the drinking increased. I transferred to South Carolina for a couple of years. The drinking increased. Everywhere I went, it increased. And, like a lot of us talk about, we find people that drink like us. I know I did, and so I don't seem as bad when there's other guys doing the same thing as me. But again, I'm getting tremendous consequences at home. My marriage was strained really from the beginning. We stayed married for 25 years and, it progressively got worse. I'm not proud to say that, I was not kind to my ex-wife. I said things that no person should say to another person that they supposedly care about, name calling, verbal abuse. I was at best neglectful with my kids. Certainly I did things, I'm not proud of. I drove with them in the car when I was under the influence, many things like that. And by the grace of God, I was never caught doing any of those things. Sometimes I wonder, would that have made me stop? I'd like to say yes, but I don't know because, again, I had a wife and close friends that were telling me, hey, bud, it's time to calm down. And, I really just ignored those comments. I had no interest in stopping. I would say things to my ex-wife like, if you don't like it, then, that's on you. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And again, I have control over what I'm doing. And because I was a spree drinker and a binge drinker for the most part, I could go a couple of weeks. Something bad would happen and I would, put the plug in the jug for a couple of weeks or even a month or a few days. And, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about it, that I can't bring into memory with sufficient force, what's happened just a few days, weeks, or months ago. And sure enough, I would minimize or disregard things that happen. I would say to myself, well, I just quit for 2 weeks. I can't be an alcoholic. Alcoholics live under a bridge. They drink out of a bag. That's not me. I got a career, a job, all that kind of stuff. I moved to Minnesota to be an Army recruiter. And towards the end of that time there, my wife at the time had left to go give birth to our 3rd child. She moved back to South Carolina temporarily. And after the fact, she told me she had left me. I didn't know that at the time. But, so definitely there was escalation. There was progression. People at work were starting to notice that, I was coming in hungover and not, I'd get somewhere with this new attitude of I'm going to clean up my act. I'd be a top performer. And then after a year or two, I'm starting to show the signs of my alcoholism. And, it culminated when I was about 30 years old. I got stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And, again, resentment got me not drinking. I wanted to go back to Europe. The Army was unable to accommodate me, and I got a resentment about it. And I decided I would leave the Army after a 12.5 year career that was, 60, 70% of the way to retirement. And I just up and walked away, because I had this chip on my shoulder thinking I'm not getting what I deserve, what I want, and I'll show them. I'll just get out of the Army, and I've got this job offer, and I'm going to take that. And, and I just walked away from the Army, and I was very resentful to the institution of the military, as silly as that sounds, for many years after I left the Army, because, in my mind, they had, mistreated me. My ego and pride were completely out of control. And, that's something that I was able to rectify many years later, again, through the program of recovery and God's grace. But it's something that I carried with me for years, to the point, Joe, I'll tell you, I would not tell people I was a veteran. They would say, "Are you a veteran? Were you in the military?" And I'd say, "No." That's the power of like a carried resentment for me, that I will hate something forever if I get there. So I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what I had. I thought I was justified and that they did me wrong, and that, that I'm just going to get on with my life and forget about them.
Yeah, it's amazing what we do to ourselves. And one of my favorite sayings about resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other people to die, because it just, it poison, it makes us so sick,
The Army's still in business, last I heard.
Well, and, one, thank you for your service, Pete. And, but I can only imagine how big that resentment was, So what changed for you? Like what kind of brought you into the rooms?
So I got a job with a pharmaceutical company, and, really fed my ego big time. I made a lot more money. This was in 2000. I traveled all over the world. I called on, military bases, VA medical centers, all federal government accounts all over the world. And I traveled 9 months out of the year. I was away from home, staying in hotels. And that really let my alcoholism or facilitated my alcoholism really taking off, because, I had no boundaries. And, I was drinking much more often, for the entirety of trips sometimes. And, really just was getting out of control. And in 2003, again, same thing, very high performer the first couple of years. They thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then, we got together many times a year as a company, the group of salespeople I worked with, my bosses, and, had meetings and went to conferences and things. And then my behavior became visible to those folks. And I had a great boss at the time, Tim F. And, he was one of us, and he made it known to everybody in the company. It was no secret. And we would be at social functions, dinners or whatever, and I'd, be halfway to the wind. And he would look at me and shake his little club soda and just say, "Hey, Pete, if you ever want to do something different, if you ever don't want to drink or you ever want to talk about it, just let me know." And that's all he said. He didn't say, "You better quit drinking or else." He really personified the chapter to employers in Alcoholics Anonymous, where it says, if your man wants to try to get better, you should do everything you can to help him. And he told me his experience, and he told me about, that he used to be a wild, crazy man. And, that through AA, he was able to stop drinking, not only stop drinking and have a great life, which I didn't understand that. That made no sense to me. Alcohol was my identity. Some people, it's their job. Some people, it's their family. For me, drinking was my identity. You never saw me without an empty hand. And so fast forward to, the beginning of 2003, and I started to feel the heat at work. They were getting on me. My numbers were down. I was becoming unreliable. They were looking for me. "Where are you at? What are you doing?" And so I felt the heat. My personal life was crashing around me. My wife was really unglued about our home life. It was pretty terrible. And so I made a preemptive strike. I called that guy, Tim F., and I said, Tim, I think I need help with my drinking. And there was a part of me that meant it. There really was. There was a part of me that was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I knew the jig was getting close to being up. And I was just running out of gas. And so they said, hey, no problem. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to send you to treatment for 30 days. We're going to pay you your pay. This is in 2003. Most companies, insurance didn't cover this stuff back then. They said, we're going to pay your treatment costs. We don't want it back. We're going to pay you your pay. We just want you to go get better and stay better. That's all we want. Just like the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about. And so I went to treatment for 30 days and I came out and I felt better. It's kind of like they talk about in the vision for you. I was the little boy whistling in the dark, never felt better, never worked better, never thought better. And I went to some AA meetings, and I went to an AA meeting and I asked a guy to sponsor me, and I called him the next day and he didn't call me back. And I called him the next day and he didn't call me back. Well, Pete likes a good resentment. So, I decided, AA was, not what it was, dressed up to be, or sold to be, and that these people really didn't care about me. And, I kept going to meetings for a little while, and, my wife at the time said, you got to keep going to those meetings forever. And I'm like, not really, I'm feeling better. I'm 4 months sober now at the time, or whatever it was. And, I went on a trip to New York and had a business meeting, and I knew at 4 months sober at the end of that meeting, I was going to drink. And I did. And I not only did I drink, I basically disappeared for a day and a half. I drank and just completely blacked out and checked out. And I'd like to tell you that, man, that woke me up to the fact that my alcoholism had progressed and that I wised up and that I ran back into the rooms of AA, but that's not what happened. I drank for another 18 months. And it was a pathetic drinking. It was, my body was starting to shut down on me. I would drink 2 beers and black out. I would drink an 18 pack of beer and nothing would happen. I mean, I was going haywire, and my physical self started to really deteriorate. But what got me back into Alcoholics Anonymous was I was the loneliest person on earth. I had a wife, 3 kids. I had people around me, friends, neighbors, whatever you want to call them, a couple of work acquaintances. And I just became one of the loneliest people on earth. I went back to work at that job. They took me back with open arms. They found out I was drinking again. I got arrested. I bailed myself out on the company credit card. They were not happy about that. And then they took a further look at my expense account and realized that I had done some other inappropriate things, and they fired me. And again, I had a resentment against them the size of, the universe. How dare they, after everything I've done for them, couldn't see that they had given me every opportunity to get sober and to clean up my act. All I saw was they gave up on me. They don't believe in me. They don't think I'm worth it. They're just kicking me to the curb. I have a wife and kids. We're all going to be starving now. And, again, out of that 18 months, that was, say, 8 months after I got out of treatment. So I spent another almost year drinking before I crawled back into AA.
What was different this time, Pete?
Yeah, great question. Our book talks a lot about, the book Alcoholics Anonymous talks a lot about, I've got to get to a place where I'm beyond human aid, and that, I can either go on to the bitter end or accept spiritual help. And I really had to sit and think about it for a while. I know now what my problem was I was afraid. I was full of fear. I did not know that at the time. At the time, I thought I was the toughest guy in the world. I wasn't afraid of anything or anybody. But the truth is I was afraid of everything. And I didn't figure that out for a little while. But when I came into AA, I was desperate enough to stop drinking. It was really the first time I truly wanted to stop drinking. I didn't want to get sober. I wanted to stop drinking. That was the difference. I just wanted to know, how do I live in this world without drinking and be okay. I didn't understand that I was going to need to change to be okay. My first sponsor used to always tell me, good news, man, the only thing's got to change is you. And I didn't particularly care for that. I thought everything around me was going to change. I'd stop drinking. I'd get a great job. My house would come out of foreclosure. My first year of sobriety, Joe, I went through bankruptcy twice. I lost a house in foreclosure, and I was pretty much unemployable. And I couldn't understand this God that everybody was so happy about and talked about. How is it I finally did what everybody's been asking me to do all this time, quit drinking, and this is how I'm getting paid back for it? I thought it was a joke. I didn't believe in God. I thought it was a crutch. I would say so in meetings, in my shares, which would draw a lot of old timers patting me on the back on the way out the door saying, just keep coming back, kid. Old timers would take me out to, breakfast or lunch after a meeting sometimes. And, I didn't have any money, but coffee or a stack of pancakes would show up in front of me. And I couldn't even appreciate their goodwill towards me. I was so broken and angry and resentful inside. I really, every day I was going to meetings, I was saying, I think today's the day I'm going to drink. That's it. One more day. I'm going to get that 60-day chip. I'm going to get that 90-day chip. I'm going to get that 6-month chip, and I'm going to drink. And that went on till after a year. I got my 1-year chip, and I remember just being angry, thinking, I've done this for a year. My life is crap. And it's worse than it was when I got here. And I heard a guy sharing a meeting that, the line in the big book about he had to quit drinking with no reservation of any kind, no lurking notion that he could ever drink like a normal person again, that he was a non-drinker, and what was he going to do about it? That hit me like a ton of bricks, man. I was like, I've been approaching this wrong the whole time. I've been thinking of myself as somebody who's not drinking for right now. And the way I still do it is one day at a time. Don't hear me wrong here. But if I have the mindset of I'm a non-drinker and I'm an alcoholic, which I've always accepted, or have accepted since I've been here, then I've got to take some action. I've got to follow a few simple rules, like the book says. And so that just opened my eyes to I've got to take some action. That whole first year and change, I was just going to meetings, getting there when it started, leaving when it ended, smoking a cigarette during the meeting, not paying attention, just, sitting there fuming instead of being part of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when that happened, I went up to that guy after the meeting and asked him to sponsor me. And right then and there, he said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. And he said, are you willing to believe in God? And I said, I'm willing to try something different. He said, that's good enough. And it was a big meeting, like a clubhouse type place. We moved the chairs out of the way. We did the 3rd step prayer right there. I didn't believe it, what I was saying. And I got an immediate effect right away. But praying to a God I didn't believe in, just the fact that I had finally done a first step in my mind. I had finally admitted my life was unmanageable. That was the part I couldn't get to. I wasn't living under a bridge. I still had a place. How could my life be unmanageable? But I realized then I didn't have a single working personal relationship in my life. Not one. There was nobody left for me. And so taking hold of that notion that maybe I'm willing to do something different was as close as I could get to step 2 right then. But it definitely was a step 1, which was, I can't run this anymore. I've just made a mess of everything.
So, what kept you committed on those tough days? As you were going through this process, what kept you hanging in there?
I think now it was hope that I didn't know I had. I could hear people that had far worse circumstances than me that were getting better, and I could see it. I saw guys coming in after me, 6 months after me, that were better than me, getting better than me. Like they were smiling, they were happy, they were talking, they were, becoming part of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was just a bump on a log back there, complaining and moaning and, making excuses and trying to come up with reasons not to do better. But I think that hope really started to set in with me. And once I started working with that sponsor, I really started following suggestions like getting there early, making coffee, all the things you're talking about, cleaning ashtrays, doing little service projects, going in on Saturday morning and cleaning the clubhouse, going to detox meetings, talking to people in paper pajamas, which, there's no better service work than that. That'll help you. And just starting to slowly do the things that were suggested to me. And I did the steps. And once we got into the steps right away, got in the book, that is when things started to change for me. My relationship with a higher power has been very slow to progress over the last 21 years, but it has progressed. It started with karma. I kind of used karma at first, you'll get yours. Then I realized that's not quite the right use of a higher power's will with mine, but, it took a little bit of time. I slowly evolved to where nature became a big part of my concept of a higher power. And, that if the tides can rise and fall and the sun comes up and goes down and there's stars out there, that there's definitely something bigger than me. And then slowly over time, the longer I've hung around, the more guys I've worked with, the more miracles I've seen, and the more miracles I've seen in my own life, and recognized that I now can believe that there's actually a force out there, that is positively working in my life. That's like the growth, that I went from just believing there's something out there and it's all random to there's something out there and it's not random, to there's something out there and it's not only not random, but it's actually trying to positively work in my life if I will participate with it. And that's another big thing I've learned is, my will has to be part of this to work these other steps. And to do God's will, I've got to bring and leverage my will to make that happen. So that's been a slow growth over time.
I was just thinking, I think it was the surrender that I think that's what I'm hearing you say. Like that was the hard part, is that it's that surrender. So what does surrender mean to you?
Surrender means to me, all in on sobriety, all in on God's will for me. God does not want me to be a useless drinking alcoholic. I am no good to anybody in this world. I'm no good to myself. I'm no good to him. All in every day, the best of my ability. Some days are not great. To this day, some days I just don't have the best days. I'm far from perfect. The great thing about this program is it gives us the ability to, one day at a time, to do our best. And when we don't, we've got a way to fix it and move on, versus stay in resentment, stay in anger, stay in fear. These are things that owned me my entire life, and I had no idea. Working a real fourth step for the first time, and I work fourth steps all the time now. When I have a disagreement with my boss, I can call my sponsor or another fellow in the program and talk through what my part is in it, right? I'm not the boss. That's number one. And then look for what's going on with me. But I have a way now not to develop these resentments and these fears and these, the genesis of my self-pity that keep me completely blocked off from the sunlight of the spirit. And that's how I live my life. And, my point about being dry that first year of sobriety is that putting the plug in the jug doesn't do it. That's just the beginning. That is only that initial step. If I don't change, I'm going to continue to be the same angry Pete I've always been. And eventually, I believe I will drink again if I stay that guy. So my job with my spiritual fitness is to always be seeking and trying to grow and progress. It's not to get somewhere. It's just to keep trying to seek my higher power and find out what his will for me is, and try to execute that to the best of my ability.
I think it's amazing, Pete, you're talking about, especially, 21 years in, remaining teachable. I think that's such a key. I struggle with that sometimes, but I think it's just so important. So what are some of like the most valuable lessons you've learned over the time you've been sober?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about that, Joe, because it's not all roses. I want to be clear about that. Life doesn't get, we don't win the lottery. My first 5 or 6 years of sobriety, I had trouble keeping jobs. I would get a good job and I would lose a job, some through my doing, some not. It took me a while. It really took me a while to get my pride and ego in check, to be honest with you. And that's still a battle, I think, sometimes. You get a little success. The humility is a really important word to me, because that's not thinking less of myself. It's thinking of myself less. And I, sometimes when things get really successful, I want to take more credit than I should. The amount of blessings and miracles I've had over the years, and I call them blessings, not luck. That's intentional. That I've had over the years to get job interviews, to get things to happen. When you really look at it on paper, if I ever write these things down like I did my first step, I can see, oh my gosh, there's so many things that shouldn't have happened. So many jobs I wasn't qualified for. So many great things that have happened in my life that I just cannot explain except for the intervention and grace of a higher power. So that's been a big takeaway. Very active in Alcoholics Anonymous, a lot of my sobriety, but not all of my sobriety. I spent the first few years in South Carolina, going to 6 or 7 meetings a week, very active. Then I've moved 7 times in sobriety now. And a couple of times done it really well. I want to focus on one time I didn't do it so well. I moved to Washington, D.C. for work, probably when I was about 8 or 9 years sober, 9 years sober, I think. And for whatever reason, got there and very quickly felt disconnected. I think part of it was, new work environment, some new things going on in my life. I was going through a divorce at the time, and I just felt like I had a really hard time connecting. I know now that was me. I went to meetings, now all of a sudden now I'm saying I don't like the format. I don't like this. I don't like that. And next thing you know, I'm down to a couple meetings a week. I'm not working with any newcomers. And so I moved from there, moved to Oregon for a short amount of time, and really was unhappy there, unhappy with the work, unhappy with, the meetings, unhappy with everything. And I really, for the most part, ratcheted down to going to probably 1 meeting a month. I wasn't talking to other alcoholics. I wasn't doing any service work. I wasn't in the literature. My prayer life became almost non-existent. And then it was said to me by somebody who was very close to me that I was not the same person they had met years before. My attitude and outlook on life had become very different than what it was a couple years before. And that really hit me like a ton of bricks. I was very negative. I felt myself holding on to resentments. Fear was starting to grip hold of me again. And I moved to Richmond, Virginia in 2016. So I was about 12 years sober, and went back to AA with the objective of being back in the middle of the pack, in the middle of the bed, as we like to say. And it took some time. I got a sponsor, Dan Kay, who was a little bit more militant than what I had been used to. And, he, asked me what I was looking to get out of our relationship. And I told him, I said, I really want to get back in Alcoholics Anonymous. I really want to feel like a member, like a part of the family. And I want to get the promises again. They were starting to fade for me. I wasn't the no good active alcoholic I was when I got here, but a lot of those character defects were really starting to pop up. And so we got back in the steps, but we also got me back to meetings. And after a while, he'd say, how are you feeling? I'd say, I'm feeling a little better. And he'd say, how about you sit at the table, instead of the back of the room? And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then he'd ask me again, how are you feeling? I'm like, a little better. And he'd say, okay, well, how about you share in a meeting? You got so many years of sobriety. How about you talk about your experience? And I started doing that, and I started feeling a little better. And he said, how about you get a newcomer to work with? And I said, oh God, I don't want to do that. And he said, I thought you were willing to go to any lengths to get sober. And so I started sponsoring guys again. And a young man that I started sponsoring there is still sober today, and we stay in touch. And I would say working with that guy alone was probably the single most important factor in me becoming really a good standing member of Alcoholics Anonymous again, to where I started getting the promises again. I got back in the literature. I, am working the steps both for myself and with other men, taking on the role of mentor to other fellows in the program, being active in my home group and other groups in town, things like that. So, that really got me back on the beam. So if anybody's out there listening and, they have some experience and some time in recovery, but they don't feel like they're getting everything from it they can, or they want to, you can ask yourself, how willing am I being? Am I willing to surrender, like you said before? Am I all in? And I'm blessed that I didn't take a drink during that period. But I'll tell you, there was a couple of years there where I see now, as I hear others come back and tell me about their slips and their relapses, that's where I was heading. But the grace of God, I heard something great. I'm going to steal from a lady that shared at a speaker meeting recently. The grace of God slammed into my circumstances. It wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but it's what I needed. And God, graced me again with, that willingness and that surrender that I didn't have. And today, I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina in 2020 during COVID. And, that was an interesting time, obviously, for those of us in recovery. I moved here in the first month or two, March or April, and there were no meetings going on. But I took a whim and showed up at a Saturday morning men's meeting, Men Living Sober meeting that was in the meeting guide. And there were about 10 guys sitting in the courtyard outside a church. And it was cold for April. It was, definitely chillier than what I was expecting. And I want to tell you this because it's just a great example of God showing off, in my opinion. So I go to this meeting. I'm new to town. I introduce myself. The guys are all chatting with me. And the guy that's chairing the meeting is an old timer. And he says, hey, so where do you live? And I said, I live in this little town called Hampstead, about 7 miles north of Wilmington. He goes, oh, hey, this new guy here, he lives up in Hampstead. And we start talking. We live about 100 yards from each other. The guy was like 60 days sober, and he's still sober today. He got sober during COVID. Lots of people did. And we kept meeting at that courtyard for about a year before the church would let us back in. And we started a big book study out of that group. We didn't worry about who had vaccines and who didn't. Anybody was free to come as long as you were sober, wanted to be sober, had a desire to be sober. And so we did that on Wednesday nights. We still do that to this day. That's been over 5 years ago. And a lot of guys got sober during COVID, in that courtyard and at that kitchen table and at other meetings like that in our area, because there was such a limit on how many people could meet. And I know Zoom was going on, but that wasn't working for everybody. Some people needed face-to-face meetings. I know I did. I needed that fellowship. I needed that brotherhood and that camaraderie to keep my surrender going. That's part of it. Working with other people is a large part of my story now, and it's vital to my recovery.
So what are some of the best things that have happened to you? I know you talked about the challenges. What are some of the best things that have happened in sobriety?
Some of the best things that have happened to me in recovery. Number one is I have a really great relationship with my 3 adult sons. I'm very proud of them. Again, I was not the best father to them when they were young. I got sober when they were 11, 9, and 7, and now they're 32, 30, and 28. There's been some rocky times. As I mentioned, I got divorced along the way in sobriety. That was pretty difficult. But I've been able to maintain good relationships with them today. I am active in their lives. I get to show up for them when they need me. I'm a caring father, and now I'm a grandfather. I'm very excited about that. I have 2 grandkids and 1 more on the way. They let me participate in their lives. They want to be around me. It's just amazing, that they've had forgiveness in their heart for, some of my behavior, and we've been able to move past that. We openly talk about my alcoholism and some of the character defects that I have. And we've talked about things like Al-Anon and, just recovery programs. And they've shown interest in hearing about my version of a higher power. They weren't raised religiously, so that's always been fascinating. I met a wonderful woman that is now my wife. She's an active member of Al-Anon. Before I met her, she was in Al-Anon, which is great, from a previous relationship, and she continues to do that. And she works with a lot of women, and we get the opportunity together to work with some couples that have an interest in hearing about one side of recovery or the other, whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon or both. And we have wonderful relationship today. I'm proud to say that we try to use the steps in our relationship. I don't think we've uttered an ugly word to each other, which is something I'm very proud of, because that was not always the case with me. We can't undo our past, but what we can do is try to learn from it and, make a living amends and try to, live God's will today the best we can. I was able to come back to work for the government, in the federal government, and use my military time, and I recently retired. And I was able to be in a role where I served veterans for the last 13 years. So that was quite exciting. It's been quite the paradigm change. Now I'm involved in activities outside of recovery that help veterans. So I'm able to use that, one of those times and one of those experiences that I thought was the worst of my life, to try to have some type of positive impact on those who have given so freely to the country. So, that's very rewarding. But the best part is I get to show up, suit up, and be an active participant in life today. I laugh harder now than I ever have in my life. I have some of the best friends. I've probably got 20 to 30 guys that I run around town with, going to meetings, hanging out, just having social lives with. And I'm just so grateful, to be surrounded by caring, loving people that are on similar journeys to me. It's just so rewarding.
So what would you say to someone who might be listening, Pete, who may be feeling hopeless, at this point because of their situation?
Okay. If I was talking to somebody who felt hopeless, I'd say, as long as you're drawing a breath, there's hope. Many times I didn't want to come to AA. I thought I didn't want to quit drinking. I thought I didn't want to get sober. In my heart of hearts, I know I didn't want to continue living that way. And if I don't take a drink just for today, I've got a shot. That's the thing. Just try one day not to drink and try to talk to somebody who's done it before. And that's one of my favorite things about Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't listen to people's opinions. I listen to their experience. What did you do, Joe, when this happened? How did you do that, Joe? And you tell me your experience, and then I can pull from that and try to replicate that in my life. There's no, nobody's looking for anything from you but to try to be helpful. And if I can just come in here and try to open up my mind and my heart, I have a chance. But my fear when I got here was so overwhelming, fear of the unknown. I had not lived as a sober man or done sober activities since I was 15 years old. I really did not know what life was going to be like without alcohol. I was terrified. And it took me hanging around other members of Alcoholics Anonymous to watch them do it. and to see them laughing and to see them having fun and to see them overcoming death and bad things and divorce and getting laid off of jobs, and to see that people can do anything in sobriety. That experience is what I really relied on to give me hope.
That's well said, Pete. It really's, I think people need to hear that. Sobriety can be ugly. People have gone through the things we go through in life. I have a friend that always reminds me that, things aren't happening to me. Things are just happening. It's just a part of life. What does a typical day, like a recovery day in Pete's life, look like?
When I'm at my best, it starts with a prayer in the morning. Sometimes it's just a serenity prayer. And then usually I have a cup of Joe. That's for the show there, Joe. I have a cup of Joe, and I do a daily reading. I follow an email from one of our fellows, Stephen T., who sends out a thing called the Daily Ponderables, has a compendium of daily readings. I have other daily readings I try to look at. I always read the daily reflection. I typically call, me personally, I try to call between 5 to 10 alcoholics a day. I go to 5 meetings a week. I have a pretty set schedule, but I like to be adventurous too and go check out a meeting I've never been to before. I try to do that every once in a while. I have a handful of guys I sponsor, so I try to be in communication with them as often as possible. I definitely try to pray throughout the day. I try to take the, upon awakening and when retiring at night from the big book. I try to read those passages in the morning and the evening when I can. I definitely try to be as slow as I can through the day, if that makes sense. Maybe the word is deliberate. I try not to get myself too agitated about anything. But when I find myself agitated or whatever, I try to slow down. I like what you said. Things aren't happening to me. They're just happening. And if I can keep that in mind, or that general attitude, accept things as being what they're supposed to be in God's universe at the moment, I usually can be okay. But when I do get rattled, I pick up the phone and call another alcoholic. And something I was taught early on that I try to use is when I call you, I try to say, "How are you?" Because what that does is it gets the other person talking, and it shuts me up for a minute so that maybe my head will slow down, and I can hear what's going on in somebody else's life. And then maybe, just maybe, if I still feel I need to talk about something, I can bring that up and talk about it. But "How are you?" is a great way to get me out of my head. And then my wife and I, we try to say the third step prayer at night. That's a very near and dear prayer to me, because what it tells me is that, I'm just trying to do God's will. That's all I'm doing. Everything that I've been relieved of, everything good that's ever happened to me, is for me to turn around and tell somebody else about. That's the whole point. I love that in the big book, it talks about we go find other alcoholics. We don't wait for them to show up. It's my job to be the best version of a big book somebody sees. I don't do it well all the time. Believe me, that's not what I'm saying. But to try to carry that message when appropriate to people, and to try to be a demonstration of what sobriety can look like. That's what I'm supposed to do.
I love that. Pete. So is there anything that you wanted to share that we haven't talked about?
I think I would just say that one of my good friend and sponsor, Paul G., says there's no end to the good. Every time I think my life can't get better, it does. And I'm not talking about material stuff. I'm not talking about your house or your cars or your job. Those things will get better if I stay sober, just generally, because I'm a sober person and I'm generally trying to do the right thing. I'm talking about, having your kids call you and asking you for your experience, having friends that ask you to participate in things, being a valued member of society, not fearing my past, not being a prisoner of self-isolation anymore. I could be in a room with 100 people and feel like the loneliest person on earth when I was drinking. That doesn't happen to me today. Matter of fact, I enjoy being alone. I actually enjoy my own company. I can peacefully read a book or, engage in other hobbies and not crave to need to be around other people. The gifts of this program, there's no end to them. So for a guy who at 1 year sober, 1 year dry, I should say, was saying, is this it? The answer is no, this isn't it. It keeps getting better. And as long as I keep giving it away, it keeps getting better. And the real joy, the biggest joy of sobriety is watching other men get better, to see families restored, to see people come back to the living. It's unbelievable. And if you haven't witnessed that, you're missing out. To see somebody who was hopeless, who just was in such despair when they get here, to watch them get better. I've seen it time and time and time again. And it's just a beautiful thing to be a part of. It's a beautiful thing to see. And the flip side of that coin is, unfortunately, I've seen people succumb to this disease. I've seen them die, or worse as they keep drinking, their alcoholism progresses. They get here initially and they're not under a bridge. They're not drinking out of a bag, but then they are, or they're locked up or something like that. So seeing both sides of that makes me think that I want to continue to surrender every day and keep trying to do God's will and see what he has in store for me. I don't know what that is, but if I keep spiritually fit, I've got a much better chance of surviving it and thriving in it than I do if I don't.
Yeah. Well said, man. You reminded me of an old friend, Rick. Shout out to Rick. He would always say, life just keeps getting gooder and gooder and gooder. And it just always sticks in my head, So
it really does
so much, man. Yeah.
And stick with the winners. Stick with the winners. Find the people who have what you want. I have a couple of guys that I go everywhere with that are 39 years sober, and those guys are still coming. They're still doing 5 or 6 meetings a week. They're still sponsoring guys. They're still praying. They're still doing all of it. So if they're still doing it, I'm still doing it. It's working for them. I've seen them enjoy entire adult lives. They're in their late 60s now, and they're thriving at life. And if it works for them, why wouldn't I keep doing it? Again, follow the experience of other people.
I love that. And you said just don't listen to people's opinions. Listen to their experience. I think that's so important. I can't let you go, Pete, without our rapid fire questions. So are you ready, sir?
As ready as I will be. I told you I do things deliberately, so we'll see how this goes.
We call that trudging in recovery. We call that
That's right, trudging.
All right. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
It's not a recovery slogan. It's not an official AA slogan, but time takes time. It's just that,
What is,
go ahead. Sorry, rapid.
Go ahead, Pete. You can explain.
No, I was just going to say that, time takes time. I want everything to get better tomorrow. It took me a long time to get this way. It's going to take a little while for things to sort themselves out. And everything happens in God's time, not my time.
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Probably take it easy. I have a hard time with that sometimes.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
I would say prayer. There's times when I love my fellowship. I have a great network of guys. I talk to guys constantly, and that is so important to me. But sometimes it's just you and God. Sometimes it's just me and God, right? And if I don't have that relationship, there have been times when I've called people and they're not available. And if I don't have that higher power, who is the ultimate authority, I cannot get sober by human aid. And I can't stay sober by human aid. So I've got to have a relation. I have to have a relationship for a higher power. So that has to be it.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Get busy sooner.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
There's a band I really like, and I like all their music, called Casting Crowns. It's a Christian contemporary group. And I'm not really a Christian, but the messages of the music, there's a couple of particular songs about lost people, trying to find their way and God helping them, that really resonate with me. So I'd say that type of music.
Yep. If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
One wish, maybe that every meeting was within 5 minutes of my house. I don't know, because I'm lazy. Probably that all meetings were literature based or speaker meetings, but that's just me. Those are the meetings I really enjoy. I like being in the literature because that's where my solutions are. That's where I hear God speak to me. I don't hear God's voice in my head, but God speaks to me through other people and through literature. And again, a million times I've been struggling with something and I go to a meeting and that's what we read about. It's bizarre how that happens. That's when I remember God's not doing it to me. It's just doing it.
Well said. What step do you love the most?
Step one. It's all about step one for me. I can't do anything else until I do step one, until I get myself out of the way, which is what I really, really, really struggle with. I thought my dislike and disbelief in God was my problem when I got here. And why I struggled that first year was because I was unwilling to get myself out of the way first. I can't seek a higher power if I still think I'm it. If I think I'm the authority on things, I can't get there. So without step one, there is nothing else.
What step do you love the least?
Definitely the ninth step. I don't like to clean up my own messes. And I didn't like it at first because I just didn't want to go to people and tell them, at the time, what a piece of, junk I thought I was. Now it's different. It's almost about the fact that I'm a little bit more disappointed in myself that I've done something that I know I didn't have to do, or reacted in a way I didn't have to react to. And I've got to go clean it up. And, but I've got to do it, because if I don't, they'll nag at me. And I've had things nag at me before in recovery, like I talked about, and that's not a good way for me to be. I need to clean up those things and just move on with it. So I like to operate as well as I can so that I don't have to make a ton of 9-step amends these days.
Fair enough. It's a good reason. What is one of your favorite movies?
Just my favorite movie of all time is A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise, the Marine movie. I love that movie. I also love My Cousin Vinny, Dodgeball. I mean, it's funny to watch some of those movies I saw, back when I used to drink, and I thought they were hilarious from, I think My Cousin Vinny's from like 1990 or something. I laugh harder at it now than I did back then. Those kinds of movies, silly movies.
I always have to give a shout out when I hear that to My Cousin Vinny, because I actually have a cousin Vinny.
Love it. Love it.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I hope, boy, that's an interesting question. I hope that, he just says, I see you've been trying out there. And I wasn't trying for 34 years. I wasn't. Not only was I not trying, I was going the other way. So I feel like I still have a lot of time to make up for. I have been sober longer than I drank now, which is unbelievable to me. But I got a lot of work to do. I was a pretty rotten person for a really long time. And, one day at a time, I just want to try to do the right thing. I'm not trying to be a hero or a martyr, and it's not to get to heaven, right? It's just, I feel like I owe the world and the universe better than what I gave it the first 34 years I was here. And I'm just trying to do that. And I want to be helpful to people. I can't guarantee outcomes. I'm not in that business. God does outcomes. My job is to do some footwork and see what happens. And, if I can just keep trying to do that. And the crazy part of that is I'm the one who benefits from it. I'm the one who gets self-esteem. I'm the one who has a happy, joyous, and free life now by doing those things. They seemed arduous and hard at first, but now it's like by doing the right thing, I actually get to live this amazing life. And so I'm doing it more for that than I am, hoping for a reward one day. But I am hopeful that my higher power feels like at least I'm trying. That's the goal.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your experience, strength, and hope today, Pete. You have an amazing story, and I know that there are people out there who will get something out of it. So
I sure hope so. Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome, my friend. And for the rest of you out there, please subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of the Cup of Joe Show is released every Thursday at noon. Visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Please like, follow, subscribe, and share, because someone out there needs to hear this today. Have a good day, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to the Cup of Joe Show.